you have to live a life like Batman during this time?
Message for those pirates out there that are saying that we're going to get away with this is don't get too comfortable.
I feel like it was sort of an inside secret where everybody who was part of the station knew each other. So we didn't necessarily have to keep our identities secret out in public. And I don't feel like we thought the enemy was amongst us. The enemy was going to be coming from outside the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And probably not look like us and probably not be driving what it is that we drove, which was crappy old cars and motorcycles.
Today on the show, we are joined with an absolute legend in pirate radio, one of the pioneers throughout the 90s in the LA scene. Her name is Sue Carpenter, and the story of that is captured in this brand new documentary titled 40 Watts from Nowhere. It played recently at Slamdance, and oh my god, the footage they found of that time period is absolutely insane. And as somebody who makes independent media themselves, made me so incredibly inspired, and it is so cool to pick Sue's brain today. We cover things across the board, from what it was like being this underground thing that was massively gaining popularity, hiding from the FCC, while secretly smuggling in a bunch of cool cats like the Red Hot Chilli Peppers just because they want to be part of the movement. This is a story about community in a band of people getting together, going against the grain of mainstream media and doing things their way and not having to answer to no one who will stifle your creativity. And we also get her perspective of the current state of independent media. As much as I love doing this podcast, this is nothing like her times when it was illegal to go on the air. Something so cool and exciting about that I will never feel posting on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever the fuck you're listening to this right now. But yeah, let's get right into it. One thing I really loved too was like just hearing about the moment when you first flipped the switch and almost having like this calling even before you knew the technical sides of how to do this, but flipping that switch, like you kind of mentioned that there wasn't a feeling like that in your life. And like, I just kind of want to know like just a little bit about that moment, like of like fear, excitement and everything.
Well, I think he just nailed it. Fear and excitement. And I think at that time, fear came first.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's really flipping the switch on like changing your life. Like I was somebody who sort of considered myself a good girl, a rule follower, and even though I had spent like months like building the station, then it's like go time, right? And it's just like,
Hmm.
really doing this? Am I really gonna like break the law big time like this way? But at the same time, my favorite band was playing in the background, like John Spencer Blues Explosion. And like once you're like tuning the station and it like locks onto the signal, and then we started hearing it, then that was the euphoria, like, oh my God, it worked, like, yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. And absolutely like incredible, especially like coming from the perspective of how independent media is nowadays. Like you can just throw up easily a YouTube video, a Spotify song, everything. But to do it yourself, you had to break the law and like step into space. And also, it wasn't like just going out into a sea of clutter. You were sharing the space of other mainstream things and everything.
I mean, doesn't it seem a little bit ridiculous now? Like, considering that everything is just available at your fingertips, right?
Hmm.
But it seemed so necessary at that time, to build this radio station and find this frequency where you could operate and push out like something different that seemed so necessary because the real radio stations, although I was real,
Yes.
um, but the commercial radio stations, they just were so limited. Like what they were playing was there were so few songs that were just being played over and over and over and over again. And there was like so much great music. And I listened to college radio back before I started the radio station, and I had started to reach out to independent record labels for music, and they started sending it to me. And it really proved my point. Like one of the first records that I got was Elliott Smith. And I remember putting it on, and it was like just this revelation. It was like, wow, and that's like what I wanted to do, like to have other people have those moments where, wow, what is this? This is an amazing song.
Yeah. Just so much like heart and soul and just again
Mhm.
realness. You don't have like some guy in a suit breathing down your neck. It is more like even I loved how you curated like the community there and got all these different interesting people. And even I could tell like their personalities were different from yourself and it became this big experience.
Yeah, you could say it was curated, but it wasn't curated at all. It was
Yeah.
just sort of like naturally, one person was invited in, somehow other people found out about it. I think it was mostly me just having like an open mind and an open door. And so anybody who was interested was welcome. And so then we have this full cast of characters that you see in the movie who I really do think of as characters because they are all unique individuals with very different musical tastes, and a lot of them had great taste and had like really gifted ways of speaking. Like
Hmm.
I was the worst DJ on my own station by far, but yeah, it was completely natural, just the way that it was beautiful.
Yeah, and another beautiful thing is how much footage you have captured of that time. Even like get myself getting to see all these personalities and not being around it, it made me kind of like feel like I was like in that room and it made me like want to like talk to all these people as well. It was so cool.
Yeah. I mean, I felt so lucky that I just learned that this footage existed 2 years ago. I didn't know that it existed.
Wow, that recently? That
Yeah,
must have been mind blowing to get
was
and
my
look at. Yeah.
Yeah, and that happened. Like that was a weird sequence of events. So I wrote this book, more than 20 years ago. That book got discovered by some people who had heard tell that there was this radio station that operated in their neighborhood so long ago. They found the book, they wanted to turn it into an experiential play. They did that. They did that in this like little room that looked like a recreation of the station. And it looked so much like the station because I gave them all the stuff that I had that I decided to bring back the DJs and like do a reunion for a long weekend with Watt and Don Bowles and Keith Morris. And like, I think it was a quarter of the DJs, so 25 DJs. And it was through that, people listening to this live stream, that one of the DJs was like, hey, I have footage. And I was
Wow.
like, what? Because he was listening. He was listening to this thing that we had recorded. Like, so if the book hadn't been discovered, if I hadn't done that, like he was ready to throw them away. They were just sitting in his garage.
Wow.
He said, I've got these and I'll give them to you. And I watched it and I was like, he has the whole story, because he
Yeah.
wasn't just in the station. He was
Mhm.
outside in the community. And when he started filming was like right in our heyday. And then we had this period where we had a scare with the FCC, and then we came back. And so he caught like, hooray, yay, like nothing's going to happen to us. And then it was just like, we get busted.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
got like, the whole thing. And I just felt like once I saw that, I couldn't not do anything with it. Right.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I loved watching it, like, especially as an independent media guy as well. Like, I got so much inspiration from it. And I just kind of wanted to know too, if you if you guys like in a world where you never got shut down, could you see yourself still evolving and being part of this station, or was this just a chapter that you kind of left behind?
I don't know.
Hmm.
There was the opportunity because internet radio was just starting like right at the end. And some of the DJs thought we should do that. And I wasn't particularly interested because it seemed like you were trading your neighborhood for the world. And I'm sure that there's benefits to that, but I liked that I could go into the local coffee shop and hear my radio station playing. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there was something about it all just being like this small thing that was for this small group of people versus nameless, fameless people in, I don't know, Serbia. I mean, I
Yeah.
no. it didn't seem like it had the same allure to me. And who knows? Like,
Yeah, it's
I
just
don't
like one
know.
of those what ifs, but like a big what if, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there are stations that there's one station in particular, Dub Lab, which started out of another pirate radio station at the exact same time as me in LA that was operated out of USC. And they basically did what KBLT could have done but didn't.
Mhm.
Went legit, like got the low power FM license when it became available, did the online radio station, and now they're huge, but there's only room for one to do that, right? So I'm happy it was them. I don't know if I would have liked to do that.
We're taking a little break in this interview. It's actually just for cutting purposes because this is actually two interviews mashed up in one. I had many questions for Sue, and her wonderful publicist Annie gave us some extra time on a later date to ask her even more questions. So if you're watching this on YouTube, no, we didn't do a Beyonce wardrobe change, but this was recorded a few days after. And we're gonna get back into it as we ask Sue if she ever had to keep herself a secret during this period of time. During that period, did anybody ever recognize your voice in public or anything like that?
It's not at that time. Since then, I have worked in public radio and people have recognized my voice there. But no, I don't remember anybody being like, "Oh, are you that pirate radio girl?" Or like I went by many aliases when I
Hmm.
was on air at my own station. So sometimes I was Brigitte. I don't know if I was ever like Paige.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, to answer your question, I don't remember anybody just recognizing my voice and putting it together, you know?
Yeah, because I was really wondering because you guys were trying to keep it on the low as it was growing and everything. But also, was there like some kind of protocol, like to like maybe lie if somebody recognized one of the DJs? Like, did you have to live a life like Batman during this time?
Um, I feel like it was sort of an inside secret where everybody who was part of the station knew each other. So we didn't necessarily have to keep our identities secret out in public. And I don't feel like we thought the enemy was amongst us. The enemy
Hmm.
was going to be coming from outside the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And probably not look like us and probably not be driving what it is that we drove, which was crappy old cars and motorcycles. So, no, no.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to just kind of think of like what it was like during that time. And even in the other part of our interview, I was kind of talking to you about you having this station in your living space. And I could like as cool as and romantic as that sounds, having like a radio station in your home. I just want to know like was it ever like mentally taxing as well on the other side of it? Like just not having privacy and people in and out all the time, just constantly running shows?
Yeah, it was maddening. I mean, I do remember like the way that the house was configured was the radio station was up at the front, and then there was a long hallway, and then at the end of that, this is like an apartment that I rented for $400. So how long was this hallway really? But it seemed long at the time. But my bedroom was at the end of that hallway. You could close the door to the studio. You could close the door to my bedroom. There was no way of completely closing out the music. And some DJs in the middle of the night would wear headphones, and so you wouldn't necessarily hear it. And then other DJs would just be drunk and having a party with their friends and like singing along and laughing their asses off. So that was, yes, it was a little maddening. And I'm not a confrontational person, but there were a couple times when I did confront people about what it is that they were doing to no effect.
Yeah,
But
definitely. It sounds like
yeah,
my college house, but you guys were more productive and actually making something instead of just having a nonstop party. But yeah, it's interesting too to even during the documentary. I don't want to spoil so many spoiler beats of like different stories and stuff, but you were getting bigger musicians in your house as well. And it's interesting how like this was the cool place to go even though it was highly illegal and like at that time like when you had somebody like the Chili Peppers in were you ever thinking like okay, this is going to get shut down soon. This is getting way too big.
You know, I know that Keith Morris from the Circle Jerks, who is the DJ who brought them in, he uh he met them at the bottom of the hill and led them in. Like he wouldn't even give them the address. So I feel like everybody was sort of protecting it. I don't know if just the mere fact that the Red Hot Chili Peppers came in at a on a Friday night around 8 p.m. We were all under the impression that the FCC just sort of worked 9 to 5.
Yeah, yeah.
They weren't going to be tuning in and they weren't going to know that, but the way that we would get attention, like obviously when something like that happens, then the media gets hip to it. And like the media attention is what we started to get scared would kind of get the FCC's, you know, white van revving toward us. Um, but I don't know what exactly it was that tipped them off to us
Mm.
eventually, but we were, because of bands like the Chili Peppers and others that shall not be named yet, unless you see the documentary,
Mhm.
were making us very high profile.
Yeah, definitely. And so inevitably, like this does get shut down and everything. And after it, like you mentioned right now that you did end up working in radio, but for you and the other DJs, was there like this time where maybe you couldn't find another radio gig? Like, were you guys like blacklisted from being like the pirates or like, because were you
No,
like allowed to put that on a resume? Were they like impressed that you did this? Or, like,
well, it's funny because I was asked to apply for a job at the LA Times and I did not put KBLT on my resume, but I would say that a lot of the DJs who did have shows at the station, it opened up doors for them in particular to be playing at like the Viper Room. And I think one of the DJs, when I was interviewing him, and the interview didn't make it into the movie, so I'm not spoiling anything, but he ended up opening for David Bowie. And he
wow.
said because he was DJing at KBLT. So I feel like it had cachet for certain people. And I know that I was invited to DJ house parties. It sort of, people wanted what we had to offer, partially like that we could be billed as like the KBLT DJ and also the very specific types of music that we were playing.
Hmm,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And even like as you played all types of music, the spirit of just doing this is so punk rock to the core. Like it's so incredible. Like even like I couldn't even imagine like how like maybe some circles in legal places like want to take this down, but I'm sure like other people who are working in record labels like hear about this and like, yo, that's pretty cool, like from the rock star life and everything.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what attracted them to it. And I think for
Mhm.
even that it was cooler for them to show up on our station, even if it didn't have as many listeners, than to go into a mainstream commercial station.
Mhm.
It gave them more legitimacy, especially like the bigger the band, the more legitimacy for coming, like I know that Jesus and Mary Chain, when they came in, they were rerouted from a commercial station.
Yeah.
But I mean, that also feels very punk rock, right? Like,
Hell
yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah, it was kind of fun.
Yeah, so cool. And yeah, I get a lot of different listeners who are creatives themselves, from film directors and comedians and musicians and everything. But I just kind of like looking at your story and stuff. I love how you just kind of nourish the community of people who are aspiring musicians and everything. And I just wanted to know if you had any advice for somebody else, like maybe in their town, like trying to grow their community of how to like step forward and maybe like take a bit of like your spirit, what you did with KBLT to just make something special.
I think that part of the success of my station was just sort of building the infrastructure and then getting out of the way. You know, there was like this core group of DJs who started it, and then word started getting out. And when people came in, I just let them do what they want, just sort of trusting that people have their own creativity to express, they have their own record collections that they want to share. I mean, my only words to them were, please don't swear a lot, just in case the FCC is listening, Um, so my advice for people who wanted to do something similar to this is just find a core group of people who are as passionate about it as you are. And it's that whole idea of if you build it, they will come. And then just try to, I've always sort of had this idea of a benevolent dictator. I don't think anybody's ever used the word dictator to describe me, but just sort of overseeing things with a light touch, especially around creative people,
Yeah.
because you just have to trust their creativity and trust them to express themselves the way that they want to. And that was the nice thing about a illegal station, other than me being a little bit nervous about swearing, is just, have fun, like be yourself. Like, and the way that people were on mic was all over the place, And I think that's amazing too. It feels authentic.
Yeah, it definitely has a real feeling. And now in the current days, people don't need to like break into a building, climb a skyrise, and like put up an antenna to broadcast like whatever there are. And I just kind of like want to know like what's your I don't know, opinion on the evolution, how we got the YouTube, the Spotify, you just 2 clicks, where back in the day you had to actually start soldering some metal and everything together.
I mean, I think it's amazing that the tools exist so that because the urge has not gone away. There was just like eventually I got to a point where there was no more room in my station. I had like hundreds of people, that's an overstatement, but I had like at least 50 people on the waiting list at all times when I had a 24/7 station. There just wasn't any more space, but the urge to express yourself and share music, like now you can do that through YouTube. You can do that through TikTok. You can, share Spotify playlists with your friends. I mean, it's just the tools are there. And I think it's pretty amazing. I just feel like I would never want to do what you do because I feel like there's so much competition.
Yeah. Sometimes you're throwing it out and it's just like a sea of like a mess and there's little ways to guide through it. So I guess like there's blessings and curses with both, like yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, it's so cool to like hear your journey and like I mentioned last time I talked to you too, I'm going to share this doc with everybody I know who podcasts and makes different content and stuff. I think there's just something so amazing and charming about it, and like your story's just so badass. So big kudos to you, and it was like a pleasure talking to you again.
Thank you so much. I think it's funny that you think it's badass and cool because when I look back on it, it almost seems ridiculous. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I champion ridiculousness, if that's
Oh
even a word.
my.
So yeah, but yeah, much love, Susan and Annie in the shadows. Thank you once again for always connecting me with really cool people. And yeah, talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Sean.
Hope you guys enjoyed that talk with Sue Carpenter. What a freaking legend. Like we mentioned, the film 40 Watts from Nowhere, it played at Slamdance. And if you pay attention to our social media, we'll be sure to update you where you can find it, when there's a VOD, and if there are any more screenings around the world. I love having talks like this so much. It's kind of the reason why I do this. So fun, so inspiring, especially for somebody doing independent media. Susan, absolute gangsta, and yeah, it was just really fun to pick her brain. And speaking of other gangstas, I gotta give the biggest thanks to all you legends on the Patreon page. First up, the biggest thanks to the Queen, Ola Mazuka of Sonic Fold. Another huge thanks to Amanda McKnight, aka Vamp X13 on YouTube, the wonderful Jenny Potter, the legend Devin McBride, back-to-back double impact Allens, the #1 gent Alan Kent, and bigwig Alan Briggs, and last but not least, Francis Coffer, aka my mom. If you want to shout out at the end of every episode and also get these episodes early, raw, uncut, right when I'm done the Zoom call, I just post them. You go to patreon.com/thecreative-imbalance. It's only $4 a month, and beyond forever having my thanks, you can just go to bed at night and sleep soundly, knowing you're a badass motherfucker who supports raw, uncut, independent media. And nobody can take that away from you. You hear me? With that being said, we're dropping 2 episodes this week, so stay tuned. Appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I'll catch you next time. Mwah.